The Apostles form the backbone of Berserk's monster bestiary. These inhuman creatures, who were human at one point in their lives, have been reshaped by the threads of causality and karma. They rejected their own humanity in favor of living sinful lives through and through, which makes them one of the best allegories for the human condition. We all know Apostles are bloodthirsty barbarians that love inflicting pain on the world, but there are many things about them that you might not be aware of. And this is the video that you need to increase your awareness. That's why today we're taking a look at 30 facts about Apostles from Berserk that you didn't know. And spoiler warning, because there's going to be a lot of those coming your way. Let's begin. Miura borrowed Apostles from Pig Meon. Though many consider Apostles to be a Miura original, like many other things in Berserk, they're actually not. Don't worry if you didn't catch on to that though, because only manga fanatics would have caught this particular inspiration. You might be aware of the fact that Berserk began thanks to a series called Pig Meon. In that series, a young demigod named Kurt gets a massive sword made by a blacksmith and goes around hunting down the disciples of Medusa to free his family from her curse. Berserk has several panels that feel like they've been lifted straight from Pig Meon, especially whenever Godhand appears on its pages. But the main villains of this series are also an adaptation of Pig Meon's big bads. That's because another word for disciple is apostle, and that's exactly what Medusa's foot soldiers were called. Miura had a tendency to take one inspiration and then push it beyond its limits to give it his own flavor, and that's exactly what he did with the Apostles. They don't serve a Gorgon, but they do serve an evil god whose influence has ruined Berserk's world. So if you were wondering where in the hell Miura came up with the concept of an apostle, now you know it wasn't Hellraiser, it was actually Pig Meon. The first apostle was based on Vlad Tepes. A year before Young Animal picked up Berserk for serialization, Kentaro Miura published a one-shot featuring Guts, which is now dubbed as the Berserk Prototype. Several aspects of the main series were created in that one-shot, whose events became the basis for the Black Swordsman arc. Most notably, the villain of the Prototype was an evil apostle ruler whose name was Vlad Tepes. The Berserk Prototype opens with Guts and Puck encountering a garden of scarecrows, except these scarecrows are skeletons, impaled upon massive spikes and spears. As the one-shot progresses, Guts comes across a young girl named Fricka, whom he saves from a bunch of bandits. Turns out, Fricka was on her way to Vlad's castle, and Guts rescuing her put her life at risk more than it helped her. After taking advantage of her family's hospitality, Guts leaves the village despite knowing they'll send her back to Vlad anyway. It's only when he sees the proto-brand of sacrifice carved into the door of the carriage transporting Fricka that he decides he needs to kill Vlad Tepes. And that's how the Berserk Prototype's climactic battle is set up. Japanese artists have a borderline macabre fascination with the former patriarch of the House of Dracul. There are way too many anime and manga series that feature Dracula in some capacity, but Berserk's take on that character was novel in that it didn't portray his blood-sucking tendencies as a result of a bat-like existence. Instead, it was because of his apostle nature, which makes complete sense if you know anything about them, and it also brings us quite neatly to the next entry on our list. Apostles were supposed to feel like dead bodies. In the main series, whenever someone meets an apostle, they can sort of tell there's something inhuman about them, but they can't quite put their finger on it. That wasn't the case in the Prototype, because there, it was quite clear that apostles are inhuman. When Fricka finally entered the castle of Vlad Tepes, she noticed that there was a rotten stench hanging in the air, like someone had left a corpse out to rot. When she touched his body, it felt cold, like a dead body, and the fact that Guts scored a direct hit on his eye, and Vlad just pulled out his own eye in response, confirmed her suspicions. Vlad Tepes was a dead man. He'd been dead for a long time, but somehow he was alive again. After Guts engaged the proto-apostle in battle, it was revealed that his apostle power was what was powering his corpse. But this tells us something important about apostles in general. Miura's original concept was to create a sort of sentient race of zombies. His apostles would give the impression of life, but they wouldn't truly be alive. What kept them talking and moving and behaving like a person was their apostle power, without which they'd presumably return to being corpses. This concept was changed in the main series when an apostle isn't necessarily a reanimated corpse. All apostles reach a state of despair and desperation near the end of their human lives, that's true, but once they transform, that death is negated and they're truly reborn. We never hear any character in Berserk proper complaining about the weird corpse-like stench coming off of Griffiths' war demons because they aren't reanimated corpses. They're brand new beings, fashioned by causality and evil, and even their gods and overlords are different. Like we said before, Berserk's apostles are inspired from Pygmalion, and in Pygmalion, apostles served a single goddess. Well, in the prototype, Vlad Tepes was a worshipper of a single deity, and that deity was nothing like the Godhand. The apostles were disciples of Vuana in the Berserk Prototype. In the main series, apostles are at the bottom of a food chain that sees the Godhand's 5 members serving as intermediaries. They report to the Godhand, and the Godhand reports to the idea of evil, but in the prototype, all apostles were direct disciples of an ancient god of dark called Vuana. Vuana isn't a real-life deity, nor is it inspired by a particular franchise or philosophy. In fact, we don't even know what Vuana is like, but it's quite clear that Vuana is a god of darkness who spreads evil and chaos in the world because of what Vlad Tepes does in the prototype. But if we had to put a name and face to it, we'd say that Vuana is most likely inspired by the Chinese mythological figure called Qiyu, and that too is because of how Vlad himself looks. Several Chinese texts describe Qiyu as having the head of a bull with 2 horns, the body of a human being, and the hindquarters of a bear. The earliest sources listed him as having a bronze head with a metal forehead and 4 to 6 arms, all bearing various weapons. Qiyu is associated with chaos, magic, and warfare, with his greatest mythological deed being his defeat at the hands of the Yellow Emperor, but it's the former description of his appearance we're concerned with in this video. Vlad Tepes looks eerily similar to Qiyu. He has the head of a bull hog with 2 massive horns. His body looks like that of an ogre, but his furry hindquarters remind us of a bear or a massive mountain ram. It's probably safe to say that Miura drew inspiration from Chinese mythology for Vlad's look and his overlord, which is quite distinct from the West-inspired Godhand and idea of evil. But hey, that's Berserk, baby. The series evolves as the story evolves, incorporating various influences into a single cohesive work of art. But there is one thing that Miura clearly carried over to the main series from his prototype, and that is apostles have an instinctual need for human flesh. One of the reasons apostles are such terrifying creatures is their routine cannibalism. Each apostle was a human being at one point in time, so seeing them eat other human beings isn't only disgusting, it feels morally incorrect. The very first chapter of Berserk proper showed us the Snake Baron dining on a dish made from Soylent Green and spitting out the ear towards the Mare of Coca as an intimidation tactic. But the thing is, apostles don't eat people simply because they're complete degenerates. They eat people because people are a part of the food chain for them. Think of it in terms of the ghouls from Tokyo Ghoul. Ghouls can't keep down regular human food, and coffee only sustains them for so long before they need to consume flesh again. It's a ghoul's natural instinct to seek out people to consume because to them, human flesh is their only true source of nourishment. It's the same with apostles to an extent because while they can eat other kinds of living beings, human flesh is at the top of their nutrition list. One of Griffiths' major issues right now is holding his war demons back and preventing them from eating his citizens. He's become the ruler of Falconia with their strength, but as we learned back during the attack on Britannis, his apostles are getting tired of eating substitutes. In chapter 278, after defeating Ganeska, one of Zod's apostle underlings desperately appeals to him to allow his contingent to eat Guts. His argument was twofold. Guts was a sworn enemy of the apostles, having cut down so many of them, and he was also a sacrifice meant to complete Griffiths' ascension. Eating him would have completed the Eclipse cycle, and in that he wasn't wrong. Each apostle becomes an apostle because they devour the bodies and souls of the ones they love the most. That's how they gain their demonic forms. To apostles, the craving for human flesh is as intense as the thirst for water is to a parched traveler. It's an integral part of their nature, but that doesn't mean they can't control it. Zod himself is the greatest example of this, where he looks at his soldiers' ravenous hunger for human flesh as a baser instinct. He, being an apostle himself, also craves human flesh, but in his mind, discipline takes precedence over indulging such cravings, so we rarely see him eating his enemies. This isn't to say that cannibalism is permissible. All we're trying to do is shed some light on why apostles are such a-holes. To them, all other species are like coffee is to a ghoul, enough to delay the onset of hunger, but not nearly enough to eradicate it. Apostles can't have children post-ascension. Another grisly attribute of an apostle is their obsession with lust. Many apostles in Berserk tend to sexually assault their targets before killing or devouring them, and this is because they're the ultimate representation of human sin. Sex isn't a bad thing necessarily, but when it dominates all facets of your life, you have to ask yourself, am I living healthily or am I becoming a degenerate of biblical proportions? For apostles, the answer is quite clear, although there is one tiny sliver of a silver lining in their playbook: they can't produce offspring. To date, no apostle has fathered or mothered a child, and there are plenty who have given and taken the proverbial seed. The female apostle we meet at the very beginning of the Black Swordsman arc has a patented strategy of killing men mid-coitus, and yet we've never heard of her getting pregnant or giving birth to a child of any kind. It's probably because once a human becomes an apostle, their biology becomes incompatible with respect to reproduction. Apostles aren't birthed. They're created with the assistance of a Beellet, and no matter how many times an apostle has sex with another human, they simply cannot experience pregnancy or get another person pregnant. This recontextualizes Ganeska's threat of taking over Midland by getting Charlotte pregnant. That assertion was most likely as hollow as an apostle's morality, and Ganeska himself called Charlotte nothing more than a distraction in the aftermath of their interaction. And besides, if apostles could reproduce, the Godhand wouldn't have any need for a Beellets in the first place. They could just establish a reproduction program like a more twisted version of the Bene Gesserit from Dune, but they haven't, so our point stands. Apostle designs generally reflect natural predators and human fears. An apostle's appearance is the first thing that terrorizes those they target. The female apostle's alien-like appearance, the snake baron's cobra hood with a disturbingly vaginal mouth, the slug count, the penis demons from the Eclipse. 90 to 95% of all apostles have appearances that reflect predators in nature, or have insectoid appearances, or take a form that looks unsettlingly visceral because the very point of their existence is to strike fear into people's hearts. The penis demons are a horrifying allegory for the cardinal sin that is rape. Insects are creatures that many humans despise despite knowing they're essential to the ecosystem. The cobra-like snake baron and the gorilla-like wild take on forms that are much more understandable because snakes and gorillas strike fear in men's hearts just generally, but that doesn't make them any less terrifying. Miura's intention with coming up with his apostles was to create a race of beings that evoke primal fears, and in that he succeeded decisively. An apostle's power is directly influenced by their ego. This is a fact that becomes more evident when you look at the apostles who can suppress their apostle instincts, because generally speaking, they're far more powerful than the ones who don't. Nosferatu Zod is a creature that lives solely for the thrill of battle. He seeks the strongest possible opponent for himself because that's his ultimate desire in life. This ego, which transcends a human's base instinct for survival, has given him a body that is highly adaptable to all forms of battle. And there's a reason Zod is called the Immortal One. The Flame Dragon Knight Grunbeld has a strong desire to die in a way worthy of his ancestors. He came from a society that was inspired by Viking culture and tradition. When his Beellets was activated, his ego wished for a death that wasn't so petty, and that's why he became a literal flame-breathing dragon. Locus had the extreme desire to serve under a man worthy of his lance before he finally called it quits with life. That's why he's the strongest lancer in the universe today. And we don't have to explain to you how Ganeska's ego as a conquering emperor gave him the strongest apostle form in the series. Miura explained it extensively throughout all of his appearances. For an apostle whose wish is to simply escape death, their form resembles lowly beings like gorillas and snakes and slugs. But apostles whose wish to survive goes beyond mere survival are bestowed with incredible forms with unfathomable powers. They can assume leadership positions within human society. While most apostles are wandering demons who attack people whenever they catch a whiff of them, certain apostles are capable of achieving leadership positions within human society. To date, there have been 5 apostles who, at various points in their lives, have had dealings with human society. The first is Zod. As a man who lives solely for the thrill of battle and has been alive for 3 centuries, many of Zod's victims are created on the opposite end of a military campaign. In fact, he debuted in Berserk as a mercenary working for the Tudor Empire, which is how his path crossed with Griffiths. The Black Swordsman arc showed us 2 apostles in leadership positions, though how they got there vastly differs. The Slug Count was already the count of the territory he governs. After his ascension, he simply resumed his duties as a ruler, although his style of ruling changed drastically. The Snake Baron was most likely a knight of some sort before he became an apostle, purely because he had a full suit of armor built specifically with the Cobra motif in mind. He took control of Coca by force with a band of thugs, bandits, and robber knights. The last 2 apostles whom we find in leadership positions are the Black Dog Knight Wild and the Kushan Emperor Ganeska. Wild uses his power as an apostle and his status as a prisoner to convince the King of Midland to give him command over his very own regiment of quote-unquote knights. Ganeska had been the ever-victorious Emperor of Kushan for several decades before his ascension, and he clung to that position well after. This goes to show you the real danger of apostle kind. All of them aren't seeking to destroy the world as soon as possible. Some of them have the capacity to truly blend within human society and take control of it by entering leadership positions. That's a lot scarier than a monster jumping you in the woods, because what can you do when that monster is your town's ruler or your knightly order's commander? Obey them and you'll die. Disobey them and you'll die a worse death, but you'll be dead either way. It makes no difference to them whether they're leaders or not. Leadership positions just give them a lot more room to work with. Some apostles look like gag manga characters. This is going to feel like the worst observation of all time, but if you ask us, it portrays the sensitivity that was within Miura-sensei. When the eclipse happens, there are several apostles who look big, bad, and scary, as you'd expect from such an event. But there are also apostles who look tiny, fragile, and frankly cartoonish. They look like they've been ripped right out of a gag manga, which might have been Miura's way of alleviating some of the tension associated with the traumatic eclipse. Chapter 76 has the most number of appearances from such characters. When the 2-page spread of apostles shows up to depict the despair being experienced by the Band of the Falcon, you'll notice there are several tiny apostles in the foreground, which is a surprise, because most apostles we meet are at least human-sized, if not gigantic. In that same chapter, a few pages after that spread, when Void declares that all lies within the current of causality, you can see small apostles running around like they're on fire. One of them looks like a snail with legs, another looks like a caterpillar with wings, and the third is just a chibi rendition of darkness, open mouth ready to chomp down on the sacrifices coming its way. Later in the eclipse, we meet a chicken apostle whose entire body feels like one big joke, but it's even funnier when you consider the fact that the apostle wished for that form itself. These small factors do nothing to dampen the overall terror of the eclipse, but they provide brief chuckles that help us get through it without losing our goddamn minds. And on the topic of apostles that look different, fantastic apostles and how to create them. After the Millennium Falcon arc begins, we start meeting apostles whose released forms look more like fantasy creatures than monsters. The first of these is Locus. Locus's released form sees him turn into an armored centaur. The second is Grunbeld, who, upon releasing his true self, becomes a massive dragon with 4 legs, no wings, scorching hot fireballs, and skin made of corundum. Irvine is a hunter who becomes Griffiths' most dependable archer, and his released form is a combination of a direwolf and a satyr for some reason. Zod is perhaps the most chimeric apostle that exists in all of Berserk, with body parts ranging from a lion's head and paws, to a mountain goat's legs, to massive bat wings and 2 curved horns that'll give any living horned creature a run for its money. There are 3 things that every apostle we've just named has in common. The first is that they're all Griffiths' captains and lieutenants. Grunbeld is the leader of his squadron of giants, Irvine leads his archers, Locus leads his lancers, and Zod is in command of the aerial apostle unit. The second thing they have in common is their ego, which transcended their base need for survival during their rebirth rituals. Locus wanted to be the lance of the greatest ruler alive. Grunbeld wanted to die a death worthy of his ancestors. Irvine presumably wanted to go on the greatest hunt known to the world, and we've already told you what made Zod become an apostle. The third is connected to the second, in that each of them take on forms that are best suited for their purposes and also reflect their human lives. Locus is a centaur because he was the best jouster in the world. Grunbeld was called the Flame Dragon Knight because he led a group of knights by that name. These fantasy-based apostles are far stronger than their regular counterparts, but not quite as strong as the guy we're about to discuss. Ganeska is the only apostle without a physical released form. Emperor Ganeska is by far the strongest apostle we've met in Berserk. I mean, the guy's intangible in his released form, and he can hurl lightning bolts at will. What else is there to explain? Well, actually, there is one thing that explains his inhumanly strong abilities, and that's the nature of his released form. You see, while all other apostles have physical bodies that are tangible and can be cut with human weapons, Ganeshka's released form is astral in nature. When Ganeshka assumes his released form, he projects his luminous body into a deep layer of the astral world. While he's within that layer, no human weapon can touch him, and even astral weapons like Dragon Slayer can't harm him unless the user knows exactly where to attack. He uses his luminous body to subdue Undines and Sylphs, 2 of the 4 nature elementals, and once they're subdued, Ganeshka molds them into his thundercloud state. No other apostle uses magic to create their released form apart from Ganeshka, which is why it's so difficult to defeat him. Shirke had to use her highly advanced sense of astral perception to locate his true luminous body when Guts was fighting Ganeshka at Vritanis, and the only reason he succeeded in in harming Emperor Thundercloud was because he struck a temporary truce with Zod. Zod withstood several rounds of Ganeska's lightning to allow Guts' mist cutter to go through Ganeska's luminous body, and that was only enough to dispel his apostle form. Ganeska himself remained undefeated, though he wasn't untouched. A massive wound appeared on his forehead, which was also the place where Guts got him with Dragonslayer when he was in cloud form. This is why he was the trickiest apostle to deal with and the only one to have a non-physical released form. Apostle bodies are directly linked to the vortex of souls. While Ganeska was the only apostle whose released form was created in a deep layer of the astral world, all apostle bodies are linked to the deepest layer on an existential level. When an apostle uses their Beellet to trigger the rebirth ritual, the Beellet opens a fissure in their hearts. Upon accepting the Godhand's deal, that fissure is filled with the overflowing energy of evil that resides within the abyss. Apostles draw their strength and forms from the vortex of souls, a swirling mass of tortured luminous bodies that have died because of the Godhand's nefarious plans. This vortex is basically Berserk's version of hell, so in simpler terms, apostle souls have a hotline to hell. This makes a lot of sense, seeing as when Griffith became Femto, his body and soul became part of the abyss. He discarded his physical self and became a metaphysical existence dedicated to furthering the agenda of evil, and apostles are the foot soldiers of said evil. Godhand members don't exist physically, so they need agents to do their bidding within the physical world, which is where apostles come in. They receive a sliver of a Godhand's power from the same power source, but can use said power flexibly and directly. However, having a hotline to hell isn't exactly the best thing because when an apostle dies, their physical body remains in the physical world. Many Berserk fans who haven't read the manga might be wondering what happens to an apostle if they die, and we don't blame you. All adaptations of the manga fail to address the aftermath of an apostle's death, which is important because it's linked to our previous entry. Apostles are creatures of evil whose very souls have been transformed by the abyss. The fissure in their hearts can be thought of as the hook at the end of a fishing rod. This hook stays in the water as long as the fisherman needs it to, but when it's yanked out, the connection between it, the fish, and the water body is broken. Similarly, when an apostle dies, their souls are pulled into the vortex, but their physical bodies remain in the physical world. The most overt depiction of this act comes from chapter 69, which shows us Wild's death. After Zod rips him apart, the fissure in his heart is enlarged to the point the vortex of souls spills forth from it. The souls of the damned drag Wild's soul back to hell with them, leaving behind his human remains and every bystander in shock. They can't believe that a decrepit little old geezer was the monster gorilla they'd just fended off at the cost of their lives, and even if an apostle dies in the astral world, their bodies are bound to return to the physical. In the Black Swordsman arc, the Slug Count dies within the astral realm and his soul gets dragged to hell just like Wild's. But when our characters return to the physical world, so does Slug Count's physical body. This phenomenon probably occurs for every single apostle in Berserk, but we've used these two as our frame of reference because they're the only ones we've seen it happen to. An apostle can be of any age. Based on everything we've covered so far, you might think that only a certain kind of person can become an apostle, but that isn't the case. An apostle can be anyone, and of any age. Being evil isn't even a prerequisite. In fact, apostles can be completely benevolent in their human lives and still end up becoming apostles, like Grunbeld. Grunbeld was a man who had a lot of compassion in his heart. He knew what he was and what he wasn't, and yet he put his best foot forward every single day. It was only in his final moments as a human being that he expressed the desire to die the way his ancestors died, and that was enough to make him a spawn of evil. Despair and desire, these are the components that create an apostle, and because humans from all walks of life can feel and express these sentiments, there isn't an age limit on who can and cannot become an apostle. The youngest apostle we've ever seen in Berserk is barely a teenager. Rosine was a young girl who endured unimaginable amounts of abuse from her father. She tried running away from home to escape her situation, but her father tracked her down and abused her some more, instead of taking a beat and checking himself. It was at that point that Rosine snapped and wished to escape her parents and become free from her human bonds. That was enough for the Beellets in her possession to do its thing, and the rest is morbid history. That just goes to show you how fluid the nature of evil is. It exploits some of the strongest human feelings to invade the human realm, and if you've been marked as a Beellet bearer by causality, then it really doesn't matter what kind of person you were before becoming an apostle. The end result is almost always the same, whether you're 12 years old or 80. Only 2 apostles have non-human base forms. Speaking of Rosine, we think it might interest you to know that she's part of a rather eclectic class of apostles. While most apostles tend to retain their human appearances in their base forms, Rosine did not, and she is one of a grand total of 2 apostles whose base form is entirely inhuman. Rosine's wish since childhood was to become an elf. She was obsessed with the story of Pikaf, a human child whose life was saved by the Misty Valley elves, but who ended up becoming an elf hybrid and was shunned by society for it. Over time, she came to believe that she herself was Pikaf, so when her rebirth ritual began, her wish was granted. In her base form, Rosine looks like an elf, but it's a hybrid between an elf and a really evil Luna moth. That latter description fits her even more when she assumes her release state, but like we mentioned moments ago, she isn't the only one to have a non-human base form. The other apostle, who never looks like a person and can therefore never assimilate itself into human society, is the egg of the perfect world. The egg of the perfect world was a person who was born into despair. Abandoned by its parents in a garbage dump outside the Tower of Conviction, he never learned how to speak because he had no use for speech. He was an animalistic scavenger whose only wish in life was to get revenge on that world that rejected him during every stage of his life. So his desire to change the world itself gave him the form of a Beellet. There are other apostles whose base forms were drastically different from their human forms at the time of their ascension. Wild, for example, looked like a cross between a strong human and a primate in his base form when his true appearance was that of an old man, but Rosine and the Egg completely inhuman, and that's extremely rare, as is the next apostle fact. Only 4 apostles have shown the ability to create pseudo-apostles. Apostles are, generally speaking, the arms and legs of the Godhand. They might receive their marching orders from the 5 angels, but they're the ones who do the heavy lifting. In that sense, they can be seen as servants of the Godhand, but even among those servants, certain apostles are afforded more power than others, and the one power that's as rare as it is impressive is the ability to create their own set of demonic servants. Rosine and the Egg of the Perfect World are among the ranks of apostles who can create pseudo-apostles, beings transformed by injecting the abyssal power brimming within them. Rosine created 2 sets of pseudos, her elflings and the insectoid guardians who protect her Garden of Fun. The Egg created the Great Goat and transformed Mozgus and his disciples into angelic demons because he needed agents of his own to speed up the prep for the incarnation ceremony. But they aren't the only ones. The Slug Count was also capable of creating pseudo-apostles by making his servants ingest a parasitic worm that bore his face. By doing this, not only did they receive more power, they also became directly linked to the Count's consciousness. He could speak through his pseudo-servant Zondark, for instance, while allowing him to retain a diminished sense of self. And while Ganeska didn't create pseudo-apostles in his mist form, after turning into the eldritch abomination that was his Shiva form, any human he crushed with his feet was turned into a messy likeness of himself. These 4 apostles are unique because no other apostle has shown the ability to create apostles of their own. Usually, the bestowment of abyssal power necessitates the presence of a Beellets, but these apostles essentially share their own abyssal power with their targeted pseudos by injecting them with evil energy. Whether that comes in the form of a literal injection, a parasite, a cocoon, or getting crushed underneath a foot, the outcome is the same. Once captured, they become slaves to their master's will, which perpetuates a cycle that we'll get to in a couple entries. An apostle can't be killed unless their hearts are destroyed. Before we talk about the master-slave dynamic of apostle kind, let's talk about how to kill an apostle, because Guts makes it look easy, but he has years worth of experience in the matter. To kill an apostle, taking off its limbs is not enough. An apostle doesn't bleed out like a normal person, and there are apostles who can regrow or reattach severed limbs, making them stronger than they were. The only way to make an apostle death stick is to target an apostle's heart or brain and sever the link between it and the rest of their body. Miura was extremely deliberate in making this choice. A brain can survive for a few minutes after the heart stops breathing. That explains how the Slug Count was able to keep talking smack despite being decapitated. But if you bifurcate an apostle in half, or blow their chest cavity open with a cannon, or give them a permanent lobotomy with a horned implement, the flow of demonic blood within their bodies will be stymied to a level where they'll no longer be able to recuperate. This is why we see Guts dealing severe blows to his apostle enemies, often going to the extreme of cutting them in half and blowing them up at the same time. That's because he knows anything less just won't do the job. And what's a fatal injury for a human Inhuman is but a scratch for an apostle. His Dragon Slayer and Arm Cannon are the only implements suited for apostle slaying, and he ensures that he finishes the job before moving on to the next target. Even a guy as strong as him can't keep fending off the same creature over and over again, so he just doesn't try. He goes balls out on his first attempt, and more often than not, he succeeds at the expense of his immediate environment. All apostles are biological slaves of the Godhand. Now, let's get back to that slave-master dynamic we were talking about a few minutes ago, because in effect, that's what apostles are to the Godhand. They're the Godhand's physical agents in that they do things in the physical world that has a cumulative effect on the five angels' plans for the universe, but they themselves are inconsequential, as Femto tells the slug count during the Black Swordsman arc. And the reason we call them biological slaves is quite simple. Whenever an apostle is in close proximity to a Godhand member, they can't help but feel a sense of exaltation and submission that's embedded deep within their psyche. When Griffith was reborn as Femto, the first thing every apostle in the Eclipse Zone did was to bow their heads in reverence. This is because Griffith is essentially their god, and to respect him in such a way is a totally normal thing for them. What's abnormal is the fact that Femto was then able to remote control apostles through sheer will in such a way that it would make you believe telepathy is one of his abilities, but in truth, that's how all Godhand members are built. When Griffith returns to Earth and confronts Ganeska, the Kushan Emperor tries defying him at first, but he soon realizes that Griffith's mere presence is filling him with devotion and submission, and Ganeska called the dissonance between his apostle instincts and his arrogance as an emperor maddening. He was fighting every cell in his body, trying to stave off the biological slavery that's inherent in all apostles, and he nearly lost his mind because of it. None of the other war demons had any such thoughts because they simply accepted Griffith as the absolute and their ultimate master. In fact, hearing Locust question Ganeshka's loyalty as an apostle reminds us of an indoctrinated slave asking another slave how he can defy the master, and his use of that exact phrase only reinforces the idea. This is also the reason behind the war demons not rampaging through Falconia, because Griffith's presence is what holds them back from indulging themselves. It's very difficult to do whatever you want when your god and biological master is present a brisk walk away and will not hesitate to crush you to death if you mess up his plans. Oh, and also, you can't do anything to save yourself because once again, you're biologically engineered to be subservient to him. Apostle deaths do not affect their Beellets. This one feels wrong, right? I mean, usually an object like a Beellet functions like a consumable in a video game. You use it, you get insane amounts of power, and then it disappears because it served its function. But Beellets never disappear because Beellets aren't video game consumables. Just like the Lament configuration, which inspired their creation, a Beellet remains in the physical world after it's been used. If the apostle that's associated with it is alive, then it becomes inactive. If the associated apostle dies, then the Beellet's target changes and it travels to the next person ordained by causality to become an infernal demon. Beellets are highly spiritual objects forged within the abyss of despair by the idea of evil itself. They're droplets of human suffering that perpetuate the cycle by creating beings who inflict suffering upon others. One person's demise does not end human suffering, so it only makes sense that an apostle's death won't make a Beellet disappear. Right now, Guts is in possession of the Beellet that was used by the slug count to achieve his demonic form. Skull Knight created the sword of actuation by swallowing multiple Beellets and changing their form within himself. Both of these characters, who fight for humanity's triumph over evil, have Beellets that didn't originally belong to them, but that doesn't mean they can't become destined to use them in the way they were intended. When Guts shows Flora the Beellet he took from the slug count and asks her to show him how to use it, she tells him she fervently wishes it to leave his possession because she knows that it might be ownerless, but it isn't inactive. As long as there's a person in the world that craves power at any cost, the Beellet will always exist, and it will continue to exist, presumably until the idea of evil itself dies. Nosferatu Zod is the oldest living apostle. So apostles are functionally immortal, right? They have durable bodies, they can't die unless you literally tear them apart, and generally speaking, they're your worst nightmare come to life. But we get the distinct impression that the most current generation of apostles were born within the last century. The reason for that is simple. Zod has killed several of his own kind in his search for the strongest. The oldest apostle we know of besides him was Wild, who had admitted that he'd been alive for a century, but that's got nothing on Zod, who's been spilling blood for thrice that amount of time. The Immortal One has existed for over 3 centuries and seen not 1, but 2 eclipses. During that time, he's never been defeated. Not by an apostle, not by a human, and not by Skull Knight, the eternal foe of the Inhumans. Grunbeld and Locus were folk heroes before their ascension, but their legends are comparatively young compared to Zod's existence. Zod has been active for so long that no one alive remembers him as being 300 years old. He's appeared on numerous battlefields throughout the ages, relishing in the bloodshed and despairing at his own disappointment. But even the most recent accounts of his oldest appearances only go as far back as a century. If Zod himself had never told us he was 300 years old, we'd have never known. And seeing as every other apostle highlighted by the series definitely isn't that old, we feel comfortable calling the Immortal One the oldest apostle in all of Berserk. Only 2 known apostles have made more than 1 sacrifice. There is a somewhat direct correlation between the number of sacrifices a person makes and the amount of power they get in their ascension. Emperor Ganeska only sacrificed his son when he became an apostle, yet his ego as an emperor was so strong that he ended up becoming the most powerful apostle of his age. However, there are 2 other apostles that we can argue are on par with him, if not more powerful than him, and both of them have made more than 1 sacrifice. Let's start off with Grunbeld. Grunbeld sacrificed his closest friends, Sigar and Edvard, as well as the Grand Priestess Benedicte, to obtain his form as a fire-breathing dragon. He weighs several tons, his skin is composed of the 3rd hardest naturally occurring ore in the world, and Grunbeld is by far the strongest apostle when it comes to pure firepower. And yeah, that pun was very much intended. Then there's Rosine. That young girl sacrificed both her parents to obtain a form that can break the sound barrier when she's flying at top speed. The sonic booms her body produced when she did flybys at Guts' head disoriented him unlike anything else he'd experienced in his life, and the fact that she created hundreds of pseudo-apostles can only be explained by a power boost thanks to an additional sacrifice. Rosine didn't really have any idea how to use her powers properly because she was a child when she ascended, and while Grunbeld knows how to use his, he recognizes its flaws and respects Zod because even he knows the Immortal One is not to be messed with. He might have more physical strength than Zod, but Zod has the experience of 300 years of slaughter waiting at his fingertips. In fact, when he meets Grunbeld, he expresses no desire to fight him, probably because A, the idea doesn't excite him enough, and B, he knows he'll win thanks to his superior skill. While most apostles make a single sacrifice, there are cases where some apostles make more than 1, and this gives them power based on that proportionality. However, there is one case where a human being became an apostle without making a sacrifice, and that is the egg of the perfect world didn't make a sacrifice. Like we mentioned earlier in this video, the egg of the perfect world was a human being who grew up in a trash heap all by himself. He learned how to scavenge and survive, how to protect himself from certain death, but his outcast status prevented him from creating any relationships. And that's a big problem when it comes to demonic ascension because by principle, you need at least 1 sacrifice to transform. But the case of the egg was a special one because what he sacrificed wasn't a person or a group of people, it was the world itself. The egg didn't have any loved ones whose lives he could offer up in a bargain. He was a guy who didn't even have a name, but what he did have within him was rage, despair, and the desperate desire to scream out that he exists to the world at large. When he found his home being turned into a dumping ground for dead bodies, he realized he was going to die. So getting an offer to change the ugly world that rejected him and turned him into a nameless monstrosity was too tempting for him to pass up on. The egg of the perfect world is by far the only apostle who exemplifies the idea that apostles are the physical extensions of the Godhand's will, because his sole purpose in life was to hatch a god. His role in the incarnation ceremony was to serve as Griffith's vessel, and no other apostle has ever been in such a unique position. The egg of the perfect world got all the powers of an apostle, minus the grisly sacrifice, and that just doesn't happen. The reason it worked with him is quite simple. Miura had a clearly defined purpose for his existence. The egg of the perfect world is the most unique apostle in Berserk. Kentaro Miura called the egg of the perfect world the most unique apostle in all of Berserk because his existence is based on a rather obscure myth, at least by today's standards. Miura wanted the egg to be his version of a cosmic egg or a world egg, which is a concept found in some of the oldest mythological traditions in the world. Those traditions tell us that in the beginning, there was nothing but the black sea of nothingness, an empty void populated by a single egg. When that egg hatched, the universe and life itself came into existence, and its various parts created heaven, earth, and hell. Well, Berserk chooses to bring that third element into the second element while completely disregarding the first even exists. The purpose of the egg of the perfect world wasn't just giving Griffith a physical body, it also included the transformation of the physical world on the whole. When the egg cracked and Griffith emerged, the world cracked as well. The demise of the egg of the perfect world opened a fissure between the physical and astral realms, which was made evident by the emergence of trolls, ogres, kelpies, and Kliphoff shortly after, things that usually would not be tangible to regular people. The great roar of the astral world is often thought of as the event that turned the world upside down, but that's only a half-truth. The full truth is that Phantasia's emergence began when the cosmic egg of the perfect world died, bringing a new frontier filled with wonders and terrors beyond comprehension. This is also why the nameless man was able to obtain the body and powers of an apostle without making a sacrifice, because what he sacrificed was literally the whole world. That's an offering unmatched in its potential for evil, and that's what makes him the most unique apostle of all time. It's possible for apostles to increase their power. Though it's rare, it is possible for an apostle to increase their power. This can only be done in one of two ways, though: finding a way to draw more power from the abyss, or waiting to be granted the opportunity for a double ascension from the Godhand. We'll address the former one in our next entry because it ties into it, but the latter occurs only once throughout the series, when the Slug Count activates his Beellets a second time. Technically speaking, that shouldn't even have been possible because no apostle has been given the chance to ascend again, but Slug Count was given that chance, presumably because the Godhand found him to be a suitable participant for a double ascension. If he had accepted their offer, he would have become the only apostle to achieve more power through conventional means, but alas, we'll never know. That doesn't change the fact that apostles can juice themselves up, which brings us to our next point: apostle power can be harvested. The man-made Beellet is the second way through which an apostle can increase their power, although it's a method that can also break their minds in the process. Daiba created the man-made Beellet by capturing several living apostles and stitching their bodies together, creating a sort of inhuman power generator. He used it to create demonic baby soldiers called Daka, who were raised to be completely obedient to him and Ganeska, and the process involved was quite grisly indeed. The interiors of those linked apostle bodies were overflowing with evil energy. By submerging them in amniotic fluid and dropping pregnant women into the Beellet, Daiba turned their unborn offspring into hellspawn. After realizing that he could never beat Griffith through conventional means, Emperor Ganeska lowered himself into the man-made Beellet and emerged from it as the dark god of destruction dubbed Shiva. His power increased exponentially, for he was able to crush entire regiments of troops with a single foot and rain fire down from the heavens. But his mind broke under the influence of all that evil energy. Regardless, this is the second way to increase an apostle's power, and the only method we know of that harvests an apostle's power. Without all those captured apostles and the fissures in their hearts, Daiba never would have been able to create the man-made Beellet, and without the energy he harvested from them, he definitely wouldn't have been able to erect his army of Daka. Only one apostle has retained a proper link to their human life. Out of the countless apostles we've seen being depicted in Berserk, there's only one who retained a proper link to their old life, and that's the Slug Count. The Count was the ruler of a holy city with a wife and a child. His family was perfect for him, but when he caught his wife in a pagan orgy, all that changed. He killed every other heathen he could find, but he couldn't bring himself to kill her. He chose instead to take his own life, but that triggered his Beellet, and his wish was granted when his wife became his sacrifice. But that still left behind his daughter, and once the Count completed his transformation, he went right back to his duties as a ruler. He became a ruthless tyrant who falsely accused and executed many people on the charge of heresy. But what didn't change was his love for his daughter. Teresia was the one thing that could keep him sane and stable, and in fact, the Count made several attempts to win her love back, but to no avail. In order to shield her from the truth about his horrible deeds, he locked her in her room and brought her gifts every now and then, but Teresia could sense that something had changed about her dad and she didn't like it. Even the gift of an elf in the form of Puck didn't do anything to change her mind, because she wanted to see the outside world more than anything else. When she finally saw her dad fighting Guts in his demon slug form, she realized that everything the servants gossiped about was true, and the Count nearly lost hope of ever winning his daughter back. But the fact that he still had her by his side makes him the only apostle to retain a proper link to their human life, and it also led to a most unprecedented event. Only one apostle has ever rejected the Godhand's offer. This Slug Count is one of the most important apostles in Berserk because not only did he show us that apostles can retain links to their human lives, he also showed us that they themselves can be redeemed after a fashion. The reason Slug Count's second ascension didn't work out is because Teresia would have been the sacrifice for it, and while his wife had wronged him in several different ways, his daughter was the apple of his eye. When the Count was desperate and being pushed into a corner by the Godhand's intimidation tactics, he almost gave in to the urge to survive, but one look at his daughter changed all that. In the final moments of his life, he committed himself to hell so Teresia wouldn't get dragged into the karmic cycle, and this, miraculously enough, made the invocation of doom disappear. It's the only time where the Godhand's offer has been rejected, and it came from a place of pure, unadulterated love. If the Count were anything like the King of Midland in his tastes, he would have probably given her up just to save his own skin, but his love for his daughter was so pure that he sacrificed himself despite knowing the eternal torment that awaited him. In the abyss of hell, a parent who turned into a demon did the most parental act of them all, and maybe that's how we break the cycle of hell. But until that day arrives, Slug Count remains the only apostle to have ever rejected the Godhand's deal. Some apostles received their Beellets from fortune tellers. It feels like Miura wanted to create an angle where Beellets come from fortune tellers because the first time we see the object, we're told that's how it got into its associated apostle's possession. The Count got his Beellet from an Eastern merchant who in turn found it at a bazaar where a fortune teller sold it to him. That's similar to how Griffith got his Beellet and how Ganeska got his, so there's something to be said about the connection between fortune tellers and Beellets. Of course, there are other apostles who received their Beellets through less conventional means. Brunbeld got his by killing a tiger. Rosine got hers while playing in the forest. But the ones who received their Beellets through other people seem to play a greater role in the series. The Count was our explanation for how Berserk's demons operate. Ganeska was the strongest apostle on paper, and Griffith, well, you know what he did to the series. So, now that we have all these facts out of the way, let's talk about the one that might not happen but seems more likely with every passing day. There may be a Judas within Griffith's apostle army. When Berserk started, there weren't many overt references to Christianity. That's because Miura took his apostles from Pig Meon, not the Bible. But since the Conviction arc, Christianity has been a major influence on the series, to the point that we call Griffith the Antichrist posing as Jesus. Now, most of our viewers will be aware of the tale of Jesus and his apostles, but if Berserk holds up a mirror to the dark side of that system of faith, then it stands to reason that its fake Jesus will have a very real Judas amongst his apostles. There are many who can fit the bill, considering half of his war demons are starving for human flesh, but we think the top two candidates are Irvine and, believe it or not, Nosferatu Zod. Irvine is a guy we don't know much about. All we know is that he has shown uncharacteristic kindness to Sonya, and that kindness has the potential to extend to the rest of mankind. As for Zod, our speculation is just speculation, but the way he's being drawn in the most recent chapters of Berserk, something just ain't right. In chapter 372, he stood far away from the rest of Griffith's captains while he was explaining to them that their next target was the East. Before that, he attacked Elfhelm on Griffith's orders, but prior to the Elfhelm attack, he worked with Guts, one of his top targets, to take down a common enemy. Zod wanted to rip Guts apart in the aftermath of Ganeska's fall, but he didn't do it. He chose to let him go and never explained why. This is a major change from his mentality when he debuted, because back then, he was willing to crush Guts to death even if he couldn't keep fighting, and maybe this tendency to respect his opponent's strength has something more than just respect to it. We've seen that apostle kind is not monolithic. Each apostle has an identity of their own and goals they pursue relentlessly. Zod's goal has always been to seek out the absolute strongest, but now that he's been defeated by his definition of that concept, what's left for him to do? And does he agree with the many deceptions Griffith employs in all his strategies? We have a nagging suspicion that if there is a Judas within Griffith's army, it'll be either Irvine or Zod, but we know for sure that Berserk can't end without the Jesus parallels being played out to their fullest. Marvelous verdict! And with that, we've come to the end of this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys real soon. Until then, keep on struggling, fellow strugglers.